Kyle, welcome to New York. It's a pleasure to sit down with you today and mark the start of a very special collaboration with the Dalmore. From the outside, it feels like you're in a really exciting moment right now. But how do you feel about this chapter in your life?
I feel really great about this chapter. I think as I turn 30, it's a lot of self-reflection and a lot of moving with purpose and intention, which is super, super important, especially at this age. I think you kind of understand what you want in life or what you're moving towards in life, in a sense. So I would say life's pretty good right now.
Sitting here with you today, it does feel like a moment in time for you, for the Dalmore, for SW. But how would you describe the man that sat opposite me today?
That's a good question. I would describe myself as being just authentically who I perceive to the world, who I project to the world. You know, I'd say that we live in a world where there's so many people that project who they want the world to kind of see you as instead of who they actually are. So kind of what you see is what you kind of get with me at all times. So.
And when you think about where you've come from and everything that you've achieved, what do you still carry with you today that shapes who you are?
Humility. Yeah, just being humble. I think that's the most important thing. Being humble and being inquisitive, you know, asking questions, not being a Mr. Know-it-all, not knowing everything. I think that's something that I take pride on. Obviously, I think I'm pretty smart, but I think that, you know, you learn something every day.
Now, when people talk about you, they don't just mention talent, they mention hard work, dedication, attention to detail. What about those things are so important to you?
It's just the makeup, like the mental makeup of yourself and where you come from, how I got here, how you get to point A to point B. You don't get there by just moseying around, you know. Sometimes, you know, you're moseying around. Sometimes you have to hop a fence. Sometimes you have to crawl. Sometimes you can sprint. Sometimes you can just gallop, you know, frolic. You know, it's all a different pace to get to where you want to go, so.
The Dalmore have a motto, which I'm not going to try and pronounce in Latin, which is "we shine, not burn," which I interpret...
Shine, not burn?
Shine, not burn, yeah.
Okay.
Which I interpret to mean lasting success is more important than short-term success.
Mm-hmm.
How does that reflect the way that you live your life?
Not living for instant gratification, and not living for the moment, not living for the likes or the notoriety of things right away. You know, I think if you're trying to cook chili or some stew, it takes a couple hours, right? You know, it doesn't come out right away.
Now, we've spoken a bit about travel already, and obviously you said you've visited 10 countries already this year, which is a lot. So it obviously plays a big part in your life. But what experiences do you look for when you're off the court?
Culture. I look for experiences of culture, and I'm a big when in Rome type of guy. You know, I like to just indulge myself in places where other people live and do what they do and get outside of my comfort zone. I think that's something that is very important to me because I feel invigorated. I feel very, very happy in those moments.
And would you say that new destinations, new cultures change the way that you see the world and yourself?
I think that, especially for me being from a small town, Flint, Michigan is, you know, tens of thousands of people. And going to other countries and going to different cities, you know, going to college in Utah and then living in LA and DC and then now Milwaukee and then going to all these other countries, you just get a more different perspective of life. Some at a small scale, you know, obviously being in the States, coming from a small city to like a mid-city to LA, that's 3 different transitions, but then also going to a small village in Manila or going to a huge city as Shanghai. You know, they're much different paces of life.
The south of France is at the heart of the latest installment in the Cask Curation series. You mentioned before that it's a place that inspires you, but What is it about the region that captivates you?
Taste. Yeah, taste and sometimes class, you know. I think it gets a rep for being very classy, but that's all kind of really relative to your reference point. But I will say the French have immaculate taste. And I think if you look at, Paris or Lyon or Bordeaux or Cannes or Saint-Tropez, Nice, the arts are very centric there. And I believe that you can just get inspired by, just walking in a small alley there in the middle of the night, or going to a museum, or looking at the architecture. It's a very tasteful environment.
And red wine has a big influence as well, and we know you're a fan. What is it about that appeals to you as well?
I think with red wine, why I love it so much is you can kind of taste time in a sense, right? When you open a bottle, it could be a 1985, could be a 95, could be a 2012. And each bottle tastes different. And also, you can drink a 1990, which is a pretty good vintage year in that region and a lot in the world, really. Has a different taste, a taste that if you really, really know wine, you can understand a little bit about that time and space in the world. That makes sense.
Now, we know that you choose who you work with, your collaborations very carefully. What is it about the Dalmore that appeals to you, and what similarities do you see in your philosophies?
That's a great question. I think just it's authentic to me, beyond just it being a spirit and me enjoying spirit. I think that one thing that I love with spirit is the conversation aspect of things. When you're sitting down and you're at a table and you're able to conversate on life topics, on politics, on religion, on current events, all while drinking a spirit, I think that brings people together. I think that's the number one thing, being authentic to myself, right? And what I enjoy to do. And I will say just the taste level, beyond just the taste of how it tastes, but, how they move through the business world and the spirit world. I like how you don't see too much of it, and it's kind of like, in a sense. At least that's my interpretation, so.
And fashion obviously plays a big part in your life as well, and your style is quite bold and expressive, but what is it that inspires you, and where does that come from?
Growing up, going to church, grandmother used to put clothes on us. We couldn't go to church wearing sweats and shorts. We had to put on some clothes. I think going to college, I wanted to look presentable and nice, because most of high school I wore just shorts and sweats. I don't know, I just believe that it's always like your first impression is like your best impression. So I think clothes play a huge, huge part in that. I think my love for art plays a huge, huge part in that. When you talk about the boldness or the attention to detail, the attention to textures and fabrics, materials used, and placement of certain things. I think I look at clothes and how you dress as a painting. Everything kind of has to flow a little bit. Yeah.
You've mentioned art a few times. What does artistry mean to you?
Art is life, and life is art. I think that's like the simplest way to put it. I think that you gain so much inspiration. You understand the world by looking at art. You understand time and space in the world. You can understand emotion. You can feel emotion. There's so many things that you can do from just looking at a painting. And the best part about it is everybody's vantage point is typically always different. And what I see is something that you may not see. And we can conversate on that and, come to understandings or gain some knowledge from it or disagree.
You've spoken about going against the grain and not necessarily wanting to fit in at times. What is it about individuality that means so much to you?
Because there's no one really like yourself in the world unless you're trying to fit in. If you're trying to fit in, then you're going to be, like SpongeBob, right? You watched SpongeBob before?
Yeah.
Remember like all the meats, like the little planktons or whatever they are? Like you could be like that, fit a mold, or you could just, be a little different and just be yourself, cause a little conflict, cause a little reaction because you're different,
The Dalmore often talk about moments that matter. Now, we know you enjoy a whiskey every now and then, or we probably wouldn't be here. But when do you find time to enjoy a glass, and how does that influence your life?
When I'm in a much different space and time, I think that's the very interesting part about spirits in a whole, because they all kind of have a different flavor in time and space, right? I look at whiskey very similar like red wine. I don't look at whiskey and red wine the same as tequila and vodka, right? If I want to have a good time and party, I might drink something else. But if I'm trying to have a conversation or a wind down, I think that's the perfect time for a whiskey.
You've almost answered my next question, but your life's probably a bit chaotic at times. But in the midst of that chaos, how do you find time and space to slow down?
Meditation. I think that's something that I've recently started doing that has a serious impact on you. Life moves very fast for me. It's something that is uncontrollable at sometimes with the way I live and how things get thrown to me, But I think it's always important to take a couple minutes out of your day and just have to yourself, just breathe and catch the drift,
Now, when people talk about Kyle Kuzma in many years to come, what would you want them to say?
Whatever they want. Absolutely whatever they want, because everybody has their own opinion and reference point, and it only matters to them at the end of the day, so.
And finally, if your impact could be described in just a couple of words, what would they be?
My impact would be disrupting. I would say that, if you just look at how I came into my career, wasn't supposed to be drafted, led the team in scoring as a rookie, supposed to get traded, didn't get traded, won a championship, so on and so forth. So a lot of things that just to the outside world wasn't supposed to happen, right? That's disrupting. Fashion, wearing different clothes, bringing the NBA tunnel to, more couture in a sense, and right? Wearing different clothes, bold clothes, playing with silhouettes, disruptive, doing different things with shoes in companies and for athletes, pretty disruptive. So, which I don't think that's a bad word either. I think it sounds like you're just creating havoc, but it's, throwing a wrinkle into things.
Kyle, thank you.